The night the palace fell. The royal palace of the Avaran Empire was glowing with light. Tall silver towers reached into the night sky. Soft music filled the grand halls. Nobles from many star systems walked across polished crystal floors. It was a night of celebration. The war at the outer borders had finally slowed. Peace talks were close. The alien queen believed the empire was safe. Inside the throne chamber, Queen Lisara stood beneath a high golden ceiling. Her royal guards formed a perfect line on both sides of the hall. Their armor shined under the light of floating lanterns. Every entrance was secured. Every balcony was monitored. Near one of the pillars stood a human. He did not wear royal armor. He wore simple dark combat gear, no decorations, no medals. But he was officially listed as a strategic military advisor. He had arrived months ago to help improve palace defense systems. Most nobles ignored him. Some guards respected him quietly. But tonight, he stood silent, observing everything with calm eyes. Then the first explosion came. It shook the palace floor so hard that glass cracked across the ceiling. The music stopped instantly. Lights flickered. A deep alarm began to echo through the halls. The celebration turned into confusion. Another explosion followed, closer this time. Dust fell from above. Screams rose from the outer corridors. "Enemy breach!" one guard shouted. The throne chamber doors trembled as shockwaves hit the outer defenses. Queen Lisara remained standing, but her expression changed. This was not a border attack. This was inside the capital. "How?" she whispered. The royal guards immediately moved into defensive formation. Energy shields activated, weapons powered on. But the explosions did not stop. Through the large crystal windows behind the throne, flashes of fire could be seen in the distance. Enemy dropships were landing inside the palace grounds. "They bypassed orbital scans," a guard officer said quickly. "They are already inside the inner ring." The queen's heartbeat slowed, not from calmness, but from realization. This was planned carefully. The main throne doors burst open. Smoke filled the entrance. Enemy soldiers rushed inside, wearing black armor with no insignia. Their weapons fired without hesitation. The first line of royal guards returned fire. Energy blasts filled the chamber. For a moment it seemed the guards would hold. And then one of the side walls exploded inward. A second enemy squad entered from a hidden breach point. The guards were now fighting from two directions. Chaos spread quickly. "Fall back!" someone shouted. Two guards near the front were struck and fell instantly. Another group began retreating toward a side corridor. "They are too many!" one guard yelled. Queen Lisara watched in disbelief. These were her best warriors, yet fear was spreading faster than control. Another blast knocked 3 guards to the ground. One officer looked at the queen, then he made a decision. "Retreat to secondary chamber," he ordered. Several guards obeyed immediately. They ran, not all of them, but enough. The defensive line broke. The queen felt something colder than fear. Betrayal. The throne hall was no longer secure. The more enemy soldiers stepped through the smoke. The human moved. He did not run. He did not shout. He stepped calmly in front of the queen. He drew his weapon. It was not large, not advanced. Just a standard human military rifle. He positioned himself between the queen and the attackers. "Your Majesty," he said quietly, without turning around, "stay behind me." She stared at him. "You are not assigned as my guard," she said. "I know," he replied. Another explosion shook the floor. The remaining royal guards continued retreating through side exits. Within seconds, the grand throne chamber felt empty. Only the queen and the human remained at the center. Enemy soldiers advanced carefully now, surprised by the lack of resistance. One of them laughed. "Your guards have abandoned you," he called out. And the queen's fingers tightened around the edge of her throne. The human did not respond to the insult. He adjusted his stance slightly, controlled breathing, steady aim. The first attacker rushed forward. The human fired once, precise. The soldier fell. Two more advanced. Two controlled shots. Both dropped before reaching the center floor. The attackers slowed. They had expected panic. They had expected surrender. Instead, they faced a single calm human who did not move. The queen watched him closely. He did not fight wildly. He moved only when necessary. He stepped behind a pillar for cover, then leaned out carefully to fire again. Every shot was measured, every movement deliberate. Another group entered from the broken side wall. The human shifted position quickly, placing himself at an angle that forced enemies into a narrow approach path. He was controlling the space, not through strength, through discipline. The queen felt something she had not expected: safety, despite the chaos. Despite the smoke and fire, despite the betrayal, the human did not look afraid. He looked prepared. More enemies gathered at the far end of the chamber. One of them shouted, "It's only one human!" The human did not respond. He simply stood firm. The palace guards had run. The throne hall was broken. The queen was exposed. But the human did not step back. He did not look toward an escape route. He did not ask for permission to retreat. He stayed. And as the next wave of enemy soldiers prepared to charge, the human tightened his grip on his weapon and planted his feet. The guards had abandoned her. But the human was not moving. The first wave breaks. Smoke continued to rise toward the high ceiling of the throne chamber as enemy soldiers regrouped near the shattered entrance. The polished crystal floor was cracked in several places, and small fires burned along the walls where energy blasts had struck. The once beautiful hall now looked like a battlefield. Queen Lysara stood behind the human, her breathing steady but her thoughts racing. She had ruled through political crises and border wars, but she had never imagined standing nearly alone inside her own palace. The human shifted slightly, positioning himself between two fallen pillars that now formed natural cover. He glanced briefly toward the main control console near the throne. "Your Majesty," he said calmly. Is there a manual override for internal defense doors?" "Yes," she answered quickly, "near the base of the throne platform." "Activate corridor lockdown if possible," he said, without taking his eyes off the advancing enemy. She moved carefully behind him, staying low as stray energy bolts struck nearby walls. Her royal dress was not designed for combat, but she ignored discomfort and reached the control panel. Her fingers moved across the interface, initiating internal security protocols. Several heavy doors throughout the palace began sealing automatically. In front of them, the attackers began advancing again. This time, they moved more carefully. They spread out, using debris as cover. They understood now that this was not an untrained defender. The first soldier attempted to flank from the left side. The human anticipated it. He stepped sideways, fired once, and forced the attacker back behind a shattered column. Two more soldiers rushed from the center. The human did not fire immediately. He waited until they crossed a narrow choke point created by collapsed ceiling fragments. Then he fired twice in controlled bursts. Both targets fell. Queen Lysara finished activating the lockdown and returned behind him. "They will attempt another breach," she said. "Yes," he replied. "They will try to overwhelm." Another explosion sounded from the far corridor. The enemy had begun using heavier weapons. Chunks of stone and crystal fell from above. The human scanned the room quickly, calculating positions, angles, and distances. He moved toward a side staircase leading up to a small, elevated balcony. "Follow me," he said calmly. They moved together. He kept his body slightly behind hers but angled to shield her from incoming fire. They reached the balcony level, gaining a slight height advantage over the attackers below. From here, he could see their full approach pattern. "They are testing our response time," he said quietly. "You speak as if this is a training exercise," she replied, surprised by his steady tone. "It is not different," he answered. "Pressure reveals discipline." Below them, enemy soldiers regrouped again. One of them shouted an order in a harsh metallic language. 3 attackers rushed the staircase at once. The human waited until the first reached the halfway point. He stepped forward and fired downward at a sharp angle. The first soldier fell backward into the second, disrupting their formation. The third attempted to climb over them. Now the human fired again. The staircase cleared. Queen Lysara watched in shock. He did not waste movement. He did not panic. Every action had purpose. More enemy soldiers entered from the broken side wall. This time they deployed a heavy shield unit. A large armored soldier advanced slowly with a portable energy barrier protecting the group behind him. The queen felt her hope weaken. "That shield will block standard fire," she said. "Yes," he replied calmly. He lowered his weapon briefly and studied the shield's frequency pattern. "Energy shields require stable footing," he said quietly. He fired at the ceiling instead. The queen looked confused for a second. Then the weakened crystal structure above the attackers cracked under repeated hits. Large sections of ceiling fell directly onto the shield unit. The heavy soldier collapsed under debris, and the shield flickered and died. The human immediately switched aim and neutralized the exposed attackers behind him. The queen stared at him. "You studied this palace," she said slowly. "For months," he replied. "I always prepare for worst-case scenarios." Another blast shook the hall from the far right corridor. The lockdown doors were holding, but not for long. The human glanced at the remaining ammunition indicator on his weapon. "Limited supply," he murmured. Enemy reinforcements gathered again. This time they moved in larger numbers. The human stepped slightly forward on the balcony, forcing attackers into direct sight lines. He did not retreat. He did not attempt escape. He controlled the rhythm of the fight. The queen realized something important in that moment. He was not fighting to survive. He was fighting to buy time. "For what?" she asked quietly. "For response forces," he answered. "Your fleet will notice capital silence." Another group charged up the staircase, more aggressive this time. The human moved down to meet them halfway rather than waiting. Close combat began. He fired once, then shifted to hand-to-hand engagement when an attacker reached him. His movements were sharp and efficient. No wasted strikes, no dramatic gestures. He disabled one soldier with a precise strike to the joint of the armor. Another was disarmed and thrown against the stair railing. He moved like someone who had fought in tighter spaces before. Queen Lysara watched him carefully. There was no rage in his eyes, only focus. The attackers hesitated now. Their earlier confidence was fading. "It is only one human," one of them shouted again. But even as they said it, their advance slowed. Because that one human had already broken 3 waves. Smoke thickened across the throne chamber. The palace alarms continued to echo, and still the human did not move away from her. The guards had fled when fear grew too large, but the human remained steady, not because he was assigned to protect her, but because he chose to. The man behind the advisor. The smoke inside the throne chamber grew thicker, mixing with the sharp smell of burned metal and shattered crystal. The once beautiful hall now looked like a war zone. Enemy soldiers had stopped rushing blindly. They were regrouping beyond the broken entrance, clearly rethinking their strategy. They had expected a frightened queen and scattered guards. Instead, but they had found a single human who refused to fall. Queen Lysara stood slightly behind him on the balcony, watching carefully. The human's movements were controlled and deliberate, as if he had calculated every possible angle of attack long before this night began. "You were never just a strategist," she said quietly. He did not turn to look at her. His eyes remained fixed on the shifting shadows below. "Strategy keeps soldiers alive," he replied. "That is not what I meant," she said. Another explosion shook the far hallway. Dust drifted down from above. The lockdown doors were holding, but heavy weapons were slowly breaking through outer chambers. The queen studied him more closely now. When he had first arrived months ago, He had introduced himself simply as a military consultant from Earth. He had reviewed palace security systems, or suggested upgrades and quietly trained small units in tactical discipline. He never boasted. He never spoke of past battles unless directly asked. Even then, his answers were short. But palace staff whispered. They whispered that he had survived the siege of Helios Station alone for 3 days after reinforcements were cut off. They whispered that he had led evacuation routes through collapsing orbital docks while others panicked. They whispered that he once refused a command promotion because it required abandoning a wounded squad. She had dismissed those whispers as exaggeration. Now she was watching proof. "How many wars have you fought?" she asked. "Enough," he answered calmly. Another group of attackers cautiously stepped into the hall, this time using smoke screens to block his line of sight. The human lowered his rifle slightly and listened. He tilted his head, measuring footsteps through the echo of the chamber. He fired twice into the smoke. 2 bodies dropped. The remaining attackers froze. The queen felt a chill. "You can't see them," she said. "I don't need to," he replied. She realized something in that moment. He did not rely only on vision. He relied on pattern, sound, timing. He was not reacting emotionally. He was reading the battlefield like a map. Another blast hit the outer corridor. The lockdown doors finally shattered and a fresh wave of enemy soldiers poured inside the palace. The human moved down from the balcony slowly, drawing the fight back toward the central throne platform. He positioned himself at the narrow base of the steps, forcing attackers to approach from a limited direction. "You should escape through the rear chamber," he said calmly without looking back. "And leave you?" she asked. "Yes. No." He paused briefly at her answer but did not argue. More attackers rushed forward. He fired carefully, dropping 2 at the base of the steps. A third managed to fire a shot that grazed his shoulder. He did not react beyond a slight shift in posture. Blood darkened part of his sleeve. "You are injured," she said. "Minor," he replied. The attackers attempted a side approach through a broken wall opening. The human moved instantly, cutting them off before they could surround him. He used the fallen pillars and debris as cover, guiding enemy movement into tighter clusters. He fired in short bursts, conserving ammunition. The queen watched in disbelief. He was not simply surviving, he was controlling. Even wounded. "Why stay?" she asked suddenly. He glanced back at her briefly, just long enough for their eyes to meet. "Because someone has to," he said. The simplicity of the answer struck her harder than any explosion. The palace shook again. Enemy forces were now clearly committing fully to the attack. Reinforcements kept arriving. The human checked his ammunition again. Low. He switched to a sidearm and moved closer to the throne platform. The attackers sensed the change and pushed forward more aggressively. One managed to reach the lower steps and swing a heavy energy blade toward him. He blocked with his weapon housing, twisted sharply, and disarmed the attacker with a precise strike to the wrist joint. The blade clattered across the floor. He kicked the attacker backward and fired once to finish the threat. And he was breathing slightly heavier now, but his movements remained steady. "You were assigned as an advisor," the queen said quietly, stepping closer despite the danger. "Yes. But you fight like a frontline commander." He reloaded his sidearm smoothly. "I fight like someone who has seen what happens when leaders fall," he said. Her heart tightened. In that moment, she understood something deeper. He was not protecting only her life. He was protecting stability. If the queen died tonight, the empire would fracture. Civil war would follow. Outer systems would rebel. He understood that clearly. The enemy commander finally stepped into view at the far end of the chamber. He was larger than the others, wearing reinforced armor with glowing red markings. He laughed loudly. "All your guards fled," the commander shouted. And you trust a single human?" The human did not respond. He stood at the base of the throne steps, weapon raised, posture firm. The commander signaled his troops forward. A final wave prepared to charge. The queen felt fear try to rise inside her. But then she looked at the human. He was wounded, outnumbered, low on ammunition, yet he did not step back. Not even one step. The guards had run when fear took control, but the human was still standing. And as the final wave rushed forward, the queen realized something clearly. He was not staying because he was ordered. He was staying because he believed someone must. Surrounded, but unmoved. The enemy commander lifted his blade and gave the signal to charge. Dozens of armored soldiers rushed forward at once, their boots pounding against the cracked crystal floor, and the sound echoed through the throne chamber like thunder. Smoke rolled across the lower level, mixing with flashing energy fire. Queen Lysara felt the weight of the moment. The human stood alone at the base of the throne steps, wounded and nearly outnumbered beyond reason. Yet his posture did not change. He did not retreat up the stairs. He did not look for escape. He adjusted his grip on his sidearm and fired carefully, targeting the front line first. 2 attackers fell, but the rest kept coming. Energy bolts struck the throne pillars, sending fragments of crystal flying across the chamber. The human moved quickly to the left, drawing the attackers toward a narrow gap between 2 fallen columns. He knew they could not surround him if he controlled the direction of movement. He fired again, but forcing the first wave to slow as their own fallen blocked their path. One attacker managed to reach striking distance. The human shifted instantly, grabbing the attacker's arm and twisting sharply. The weapon fell from the enemy's grasp. He kicked it aside and struck the attacker with controlled force, dropping him without hesitation. Another soldier rushed from behind. The human sensed movement and pivoted, blocking the blow with his forearm guard. He stepped inside the enemy's reach and delivered a precise strike to the chest joint of the armor. The attacker collapsed. The queen watched in shock as he moved through close combat with discipline rather than rage. He did not overextend. He did not chase fleeing enemies. He simply neutralized threats one by one. The enemy commander observed carefully from the back of the formation, and he had expected chaos. Instead, he saw a pattern. "Advance from both sides," the commander shouted. More soldiers moved toward the side walls, attempting to flank around the throne platform. The human noticed instantly. He stepped back up 2 steps toward the throne, forcing attackers into a tighter approach path again. "Your Majesty," he said calmly without looking back, "move behind the throne." She obeyed without hesitation. For the first time that night, she did not question his instructions. Energy blasts struck near his feet, but he held position. His ammunition counter flashed critically low. He reloaded quickly, then dropped the empty pack to the floor. The enemy commander finally stepped forward himself. "You cannot win," the commander called out. "Your guards ran. Your fleet is unaware. This palace will fall." The human met his gaze without fear. "I am not trying to win," he replied calmly. "I am trying to delay." The commander laughed. "For what?" "For consequences," the human answered. The commander signaled a full push. Attackers rushed simultaneously from 3 angles. The human fired the last of his ammunition with careful precision, dropping several before the weapon clicked empty. He immediately switched to a combat blade attached to his belt. The queen felt her breath tighten. Now it was close combat. The first attacker lunged. The human sidestepped and struck the exposed neck joint between armor plates. The enemy fell instantly. A second attacker swung a heavy blade downward. The human blocked and redirected the strike into the stone floor. Sparks flew. He pivoted and delivered a short, but powerful strike to the attacker's knee joint, disabling him. 2 more approached together. The human backed toward the throne steps, forcing them to come at him in sequence rather than side by side. He moved with efficiency, not aggression. Every motion was clean. No wasted energy. The enemy commander finally entered the fight directly. His armor was thicker, his blade larger, his strength obvious. "You are only one man," the commander said as he stepped forward. "That is enough," the human replied. Their blades met with a sharp metallic sound. The commander struck with heavy force, trying to overpower him. The human did not attempt to match strength with strength. Instead, he angled his defense, redirecting impact rather than absorbing it. The commander attacked again, faster this time. The human stepped backward carefully, guiding the fight away from the queen's position. "You fight to protect," the commander mocked. "Your own soldiers would have run." "They are not here," the human answered calmly. The commander lunged with full force. The human ducked under the swing, pivoted behind him, and struck at a narrow seam in the back of the commander's armor. It was not a killing blow, but it forced the commander forward off balance. The human stepped inside the commander's reach and struck again, this time disabling the power core at the base of the armor. The commander dropped to one knee, systems flickering. The remaining attackers hesitated. They had expected an easy victory after the guards fled. Instead, they saw their leader wounded by a single human. A smoke thickened again as distant sounds of heavy engines echoed faintly from outside the palace walls. The human heard it first. He tilted his head slightly. The queen noticed the change in his posture. "Reinforcements?" she asked. "Possibly," he said. The attackers began to retreat slowly, dragging their wounded commander back toward the broken entrance. The human did not pursue. He remained standing at the base of the throne steps, blade lowered but ready. His shoulder continued bleeding lightly, but he ignored it. The chamber grew quieter. Only the crackling of small fires and distant alarms filled the air. The queen stepped down beside him slowly. "You stayed," she said softly. "Yes," he answered. "You could have escaped when the guards did." "Yes. Why didn't you?" He looked forward at the broken entrance. "See, because fear does not decide my position," he said calmly. Outside, the sound of approaching fleet ships grew louder. The palace had not fallen, and the human had not moved. The turning point. The distant roar of engines grew louder, vibrating through the cracked palace walls. Heavy fleet ships were descending over the capital. Reinforcements were finally responding. But inside the throne chamber, the battle was not fully over. The enemy soldiers who had begun retreating paused near the shattered entrance. Their wounded commander struggled to stand, supported by two of his men. His armor flickered weakly, but his voice remained filled with anger. "Finish it!" he shouted. "Do not retreat from one human!" The remaining attackers hesitated. They looked at the human still standing at the base of the throne steps, blood on his sleeve, the blade steady in his hand. They had seen what he could do. The human did not rush forward. He did not taunt them. He simply shifted his stance slightly, positioning himself again between the queen and the broken doorway. Queen Lysara could hear the fleet forces outside engaging enemy dropships in the sky. Explosions echoed across the city. "You should fall back now," she said quietly to him. "Our forces are arriving." He shook his head slightly. "Not until the threat inside is finished." The enemy commander roared again and pushed his soldiers forward one last time. It was not a coordinated assault anymore. It was desperation. The human quickly scanned the room. He moved toward the central control column near the throne platform. With one hand, he struck the emergency defense override panel he had installed months ago during his security upgrades. Hidden panels in the ceiling shifted. Defense turrets activated. They were limited in power and angle, designed for internal defense rather than full assault. But they were enough. The turrets fired in controlled bursts toward the entrance corridor, forcing attackers into tighter movement patterns. The human used the distraction immediately. He stepped forward, closing the distance before the enemy could adjust. He moved directly toward the wounded commander. The commander swung his blade wildly, anger overriding discipline. The human blocked cleanly and stepped inside the commander's guard. He struck precisely at the damaged armor seam again, disabling the remaining power systems completely. The commander fell hard onto the shattered floor. The remaining attackers froze. The defense turrets continued firing warning bursts. Outside, heavy armored royal forces finally entered the palace perimeter. The attackers dropped their weapons one by one. The throne chamber fell silent, except for the faint hum of damaged systems. The human lowered his blade slowly. He did not celebrate. He did not shout. He simply exhaled once and stepped back. Moments later, armored royal soldiers rushed into the hall. These were elite reinforcements from the Inner Fleet Response Unit. They immediately secured the surrendered attackers and stabilized the area. Behind them came some of the guards who had retreated earlier. They stopped at the entrance when they saw the damage, and when they saw the humans still standing. The Queen Lysara stepped forward from behind the throne steps. Her royal robes were stained with dust, but her posture remained strong. She looked at the human carefully. "You activated internal defense systems I did not know existed," she said. "I recommended upgrades," he replied calmly. "You approved them. You prepared for this." "Yes." One of the returning guard officers approached cautiously. He bowed deeply, but his voice carried shame. "Your Majesty, we regrouped to secure the outer ring and—" She raised her hand gently, stopping him. "You left," she said quietly. The officer lowered his head further. The Queen then turned her gaze back to the human. "You did not." He said nothing. The royal soldiers moved through the hall, securing bodies and extinguishing small fires, and medics approached the human and gestured toward his injured shoulder. "It can wait," he said simply. The Queen stepped closer to him, close enough to see the calm still in his eyes. "You were not assigned as my guard," she said softly. "No. You were not bound by oath to defend this throne. No. And yet you stayed when those sworn to protect me fled. Yes." The simplicity of his answers carried more weight than any speech. The guards who had retreated stood quietly along the side of the hall, unable to meet his gaze. The Queen slowly turned toward them. "When fear entered this chamber," she said clearly, "you chose survival." They remained silent. She then gestured toward the human. "He chose responsibility." The room was still. One of the younger guards dropped to one knee in respect toward the human. Then another, and soon several guards followed. The human shifted slightly, uncomfortable with the attention. "This was not about honor," he said quietly. "It was about necessity." The Queen looked at him carefully. "Necessity," she repeated. "Yes." She understood now. He had not acted out of pride. He had not acted out of loyalty to a crown. He had acted because someone had to stand. Outside, the last of the enemy dropships were destroyed by royal fleet forces. The palace was secure again. But something inside the throne chamber had changed. The guards who ran would remember this night with shame. The soldiers who arrived late would remember it with confusion. But Queen Lysara would remember one clear truth. When fear broke discipline, the human did not move. And after the smoke cleared, the fires inside the throne chamber were finally extinguished. Broken pillars lay scattered across the floor, and the once perfect crystal ceiling now showed dark scars from the attack. Medics moved carefully through the hall, treating wounded guards and securing captured enemies. The smell of smoke slowly faded, replaced by the cold air from emergency ventilation systems. Queen Lysara stood near the base of the throne steps, watching everything in silence. The palace was safe again, but her thoughts were not calm. She had witnessed something that would change how she ruled from this night forward. The human stood a short distance away, while a medic carefully sealed the wound on his shoulder. He did not complain. He did not ask for priority treatment. His focus remained on the room, scanning corners and exits even after the threat was gone. "You can relax," the medic said quietly. He gave a small nod, but did not fully lower his guard. Several royal guards who had retreated earlier remained kneeling near the entrance. Their armor was undamaged. Their weapons were still fully powered. The contrast between them and the shattered battlefield around the human was clear. The queen slowly approached them. "You left your position," she said calmly. "Yes, your majesty," the lead guard answered, voice low. "You were afraid." "Yes." She did not raise her voice. She did not punish them immediately. Instead, she turned and looked toward the human again. "He was afraid too," she said. The guards looked up in surprise. The human shook his head slightly. "Fear exists," he said calmly. "The action decides outcome." The queen stepped closer to him. "You were afraid?" she asked. "Yes," he answered without hesitation. "And yet you stayed." "Yes." "Why?" He looked at her directly. "Because fear does not remove duty." The words settled deeply into the chamber. The queen turned back toward the kneeling guards. "You see the difference?" she asked them. "Courage is not the absence of fear. It is the decision to stand despite it." The guards lowered their heads further. Outside the chamber, high-ranking commanders began arriving. They surveyed the damage and listened to rapid reports from fleet officers. The capital had survived the surprise assault, but it had come dangerously close to collapse. One commander approached the queen. "Your Majesty, we will conduct full investigation, and this breach required inside coordination." She nodded slowly. "Do so." Her eyes shifted again toward the human. "You predicted this possibility," she said. "I predicted vulnerability," he replied. "Any system can be breached." "You prepared defense points without being ordered." "Yes." "You studied our structure more carefully than my own officers." "I was assigned to advise," he said simply. She gave a faint, thoughtful smile. "You did more than advise." He did not respond. The returning guards slowly rose to their feet. Shame was written clearly in their posture. One of them stepped forward carefully. "We failed," he said quietly. The human looked at him calmly. "You survived." The guard seemed confused by the answer. "Learn from this," the human continued. "Next time, you will stand." There was no accusation in his voice, no anger, only expectation. The queen studied him carefully. He did not demand punishment for those who fled. He did not demand reward for himself. He focused only on improvement. That realization struck her more deeply than the battle itself. A royal aide approached. "Your Majesty, the court awaits instructions. The Empire is watching." She nodded slowly. The attack would spread across systems within hours. Enemies would claim weakness. Allies would question stability. She walked toward the center of the damaged hall, stepping over broken crystal and fallen debris. The human remained nearby, not beside her throne, but close enough to respond if needed. She raised her voice just enough to carry across the chamber. "Tonight the palace was tested," she said. "Some ran, and some returned, and one stood." Every eye turned toward the human. He shifted slightly, uncomfortable with attention. "I will not rule through fear," the queen continued. "I will rule through discipline. From this day forward, palace defense will be restructured under the guidance of the human advisor." Murmurs spread through the hall. She did not hesitate. "He has proven that responsibility does not require title." The commanders nodded slowly. The guards who had fled felt both shame and determination. The human looked at the queen carefully. "This was temporary," he said quietly to her. "Your people must protect you." "They will," she replied, "but you will train them." He paused briefly before answering. "Very well." Outside, dawn began to break over the capital city. The sky shifted from dark red to soft gold, and the worst of the attack was over. But something new had begun. The guards had learned fear. The Empire had learned vulnerability, and the Queen had learned something far more important. When protection was stripped away, the human did not move. The one whose stood morning light poured through the damaged crystal windows of the throne chamber, revealing clearly what the night had done. The polished floors were cracked, the golden banners were torn, burn marks scarred the high walls. Workers and engineers moved carefully through the hall, beginning the long process of rebuilding. But even as repairs started, something invisible had already changed within the Empire. Queen Lysara stood before the repaired central platform, where the throne would soon be restored. Around her gathered commanders, royal officials, fleet officers, and the guards who had fled and returned. The entire capital system was watching through secure broadcast channels. Word of the attack had already spread. The question now was not about damage. It was about strength. The human stood several steps behind her, as he always did. Not beside the throne, not in front of it, just present. The Queen began to speak, her voice calm but firm. Last night this palace was breached. Our enemies believed fear would break us from within. They believed that when our defenses collapsed, our leadership would fall. She paused briefly, allowing the weight of her words to settle. They were wrong. The hall remained silent. She turned slightly and gestured toward the human. When my royal guards faced overwhelming force, many retreated. They acted from fear. That fear is human. It is natural. But in that moment, one individual chose differently. Every eye moved toward him. He did not straighten proudly. He did not step forward. He remained still. He was not assigned as my personal guard, the Queen continued. He was not bound by ancient oath to this throne. He was not raised within our traditions. And yet when this chamber fell into chaos, he stood. The guards who had fled lowered their heads again, not in shame this time, but in reflection. He fought not for glory, she said. Not for title, not for reward. He fought because someone had to. The human met her gaze quietly. The Queen stepped down from the platform and walked toward him in full view of the court. Gasps spread softly through the chamber. It was not tradition for a queen to leave the throne to approach a soldier. She stopped in front of him. You were asked to advise, she said. Yes, he replied calmly. You were never asked to bleed for this empire. No, and yet you did. He held her gaze steadily. It was necessary. She studied his expression carefully. There was no pride in it, no expectation of recognition. She turned to the gathered guards. Strength is not measured by the armor you wear. It is measured by the position you hold when others fall. The lead guard stepped forward slowly. Your Majesty, we failed you. You failed yourselves, she corrected gently. But failure can teach. She looked back at the human. From this day forward, you will oversee palace defense restructuring. Not as a commander above them, but as a teacher among them. There was a slight pause. He nodded once. Understood. The Queen then did something unexpected. She removed the royal crest from her shoulder, a small symbol of authority worn only by the ruling sovereign, and held it out briefly. Gasps echoed through the hall. I do not offer you rank, she said calmly. You do not need it. I offer you trust. He did not take the crest immediately. Instead, he looked at it for a moment before answering. Trust is heavier than rank. Yes, she replied. And you have already carried heavier. Slowly, he accepted the crest, not as decoration, but as responsibility. The hall erupted into controlled applause, not loud and wild, but firm and unified. Even the guards who had fled struck their armored fists against their chests in salute. Outside, the rising sun fully cleared the horizon, casting golden light across the repaired sections of the palace. The city below was already rebuilding. And news of the night's events spread across the empire not as a story of weakness, but as a story of resolve. Later that day, in a quiet training hall away from the cameras and officials, the humans stood before a line of royal guards. Some of them were the same ones who had retreated. "You ran," he said calmly. "Yes," one admitted. "Next time you will not." They looked confused. "You now understand what happens when discipline breaks," he continued. "You have felt it. That memory will guide you." He did not insult them. He did not threaten them. He trained them. Hours passed as he corrected stances, adjusted timing, and repeated defensive drills. He showed them how to hold ground under pressure, how to control breathing when fear rises, how to think when others panic. The queen observed from a distance. She understood now that protection did not come from numbers alone. It came from mindset. When night fell again over the capital, the palace stood repaired and guarded once more. But this time, the guards stood differently, more aware, more disciplined. And at the center of it all stood a human who had never needed permission to do what was right. The guards had run when fear came, but the human had stayed. And because he stayed, the empire did not fall.